Okay, alright, yeah, you got me. I did not see most of that coming. If your delivery is good enough, I guess you can tell most of the same joke twice. Okay, so I really enjoyed the first Deadpool, mostly because it was kind of hard not to enjoy what is essentially a one-man show for Ryan Reynolds doing shticky jokes and goofing off R-ratedly at the expense of the superhero genre, but I didn't necessarily love it or need to see it more than once, at least until it landed in basic cable rotation. And I think the main reason why is that it really only wanted to take its central jokes so far and cut its supposedly central target so deep. That's not to say it was required to be more than the extremely funny, mildly irreverent piss take, a comic book blockbuster in general, in the X-Men movies specifically, but for me, Deadpool and his comic book appearances has always worked best either as a spear point for comedic, self-aware eviscerations of portentous superhero storytelling, especially the uniquely moronic period in the genre Deadpool himself originally came to be in, or as a mischievous, fourth-wall-busting gremlin messing with the goings-on of an otherwise supposedly serious adventure. And the first Deadpool, while a lot of fun, didn't really do very much of either of those things. It was more like a standard mid-budget superhero movie with more violence, naughtier language, and the main character getting to do a little meta self-aware comedy. Fun, well-made, and funny, but not really the brutal satirical takedown the seemingly endless age of superhero movies really could have used. So while Deadpool 2 is a lot messier and less consistent than the first one, I also feel like it's a lot funnier because it's actually aiming to be more cutting, draw some real blood, and actually smack the genre, the movies, the source material, the characters, and even the fans around a little bit. Now, I'll avoid the major spoilers, but suffice it to say, the degree to which Deadpool 2 appears to actively despise a lot of the X-Men deep lore that it's drawing on for its storytelling is not what I was expecting, even if it retroactively feels like the only suitable use for a lot of it. You'll see what I mean. Speaking of spoilers, it's kinda hard to even describe the plot without giving stuff away, but in the broad strokes, Deadpool 2 is all about Deadpool getting it in his head that he needs to force himself through some sort of major character arc in order to move on into a new phase of his life, but he's not super clear on the details of how he should do that. His initial plan is to finally bite the bullet and join the X-Men, but his inaugural mission to help contain basically an X-Men universe version of a school shooter situation goes disastrously awry because his instinct is to stand up for troubled, supposed would-be perpetrator mutant teen in a not very X-Men kind of way, which only ends up making things worse and complicating matters further. Josh Brolin's time-traveling, cyber-enhanced future soldier Cable subsequently zaps in from a Terminator-esque future timeline, which he claims can only be prevented by assassinating the kid in question, which leads to a whole lot of cameos, supporting characters, and spoilers that you're honestly gonna want to let surprise you. Seriously, I, more so than many, have indeed grown tired of fan service mythology bombs as substitutes for actual narrative reveals and storytelling in these things, but here, for the most part, they also work as legitimate jokes. And what's shocking is that the whole key to this turns out to be Cable. Not necessarily the character, though Brolin does a really good job with the gag, but rather the function he serves in the broad overarching satire. See, Cable sucks. Cable is a terrible fucking character, a one-note, grizzled badass made of guns, grit, and cliched post-apocalyptic affect, born of the same 90s Marvel sewage runoff that birthed Deadpool originally, but unlike Wade Wilson, no one ever really figured out how to re-engineer Cable into a useful figure of metatextual self-parody, unless they stick him in a Deadpool book. And Deadpool 2 recognizes this, presenting Brolin's utterly sincere take on the tortured macho warrior archetype, not just as a stoic fuddy-duddy for Deadpool to do the Bugs Bunny Elmer Fudd routine against, but as something for the sort of hero and the film to eventually argue against, which sure is kinda like what they did with Colossus in the first movie, but whereas that was more of a snarky declaration of intent at being different from normal superhero movies, since even if he's supposed to be kind of a joke here, the Deadpool movies clearly have a soft spot for Colossus, Cable is really only here to get shit on. Not just for how cheesy the whole mournful, taciturn man-feels routine actually is within the genre, which is doubly hilarious considering this is a studio that just did an entire movie of exactly that with Logan, though yes, there they actually made it work, but also for being wrong within the context of the story, i.e. no, you're not the hero if you're trying to murder a teenage abuse survivor regardless of what you think it's going to prevent. And yeah, implausibly, as much as the attempts at making Deadpool himself work as an emotional center point in his own story still don't totally come through as sincere, once Deadpool 2 tips its hands and reveals that it's actually all about Wade being convinced he can talk this kid out of repaying his own abuse with more violence and thus divert him from growing up into a Magneto-tier supervillain. He's supposed to be a version of Fire Fist for the record, but who cares? It mostly kind of almost works. Like, for real, it's genuinely bizarre to watch this roll over into a third act that's all about bad schools, abuse survival, not becoming what you hate, and realize, sure, it's funny that Deadpool is here messing up an otherwise serious genre story, but that this is exactly the shit that the regular X-Men movie should be doing instead of always trying to be an Avengers movie instead. Getting there does have some unfortunate bumps, though. Given the choice between narrative cohesion and funny jokes, Deadpool 2 almost always goes for the joke, so things get a little clunky around the middle in service of loading the bases for all of those gags at the expense of X-Men, Marvel, and comic book lore in general, most of which are still too funny to spoil. On the less forgivable side, it's unfortunate that a film that devotes more than a little of its satirical fire on the hypocrisies of its own medium still asks us to cringe through appearances by T.J. Miller, though his role is decidedly smaller this time around, so there's that. A big plus, meanwhile, turns out to be Zazie Beetz as Domino, who's here more or less as the opposite of the brutal flaying the film is giving to Cable, and the broader spectrum of gritty, badass characters, the running joke being that her seemingly silly-sounding mutant power of good luck is actually very awesome-looking applied to live action. She's a lot of fun, hope we see more of her. Brianna Hildebrand makes a welcome return as Negasonic Teenage Warhead, this time along Shiori Kutsuna as her love interest Yukio, and it's pretty great to see a genre movie casually drop in a female-female couple whose presence isn't downplayed or even a little bit framed for the titillation of dudes in the audience. They're just kind of there, matter-of-factly. Deadpool 2 is unwieldy and less sturdy movie than the original, but it's also bigger, more ambitious, more cutting in its humor, probably funnier, and believe it or not, smarter overall. If you liked the first, you're probably gonna like this one, and if you didn't, you might still probably like this one. 3 stars. I kind of feel like if they're going to do a part 3, they should probably wait until the whole Marvel, Disney, X-Men thing is done so they can do all of those jokes, and either way, I'm still more interested in seeing Deadpool be the comedy relief in someone else's movie, but I was wrong about not doing a sequel, so who the hell knows.